The panic in Paris, how France and the EU are begging to get back into Africa, and getting humiliated. The chasse gardée, how the trap was set. For centuries, the relationship between France and its former African colonies was governed by an unwritten rule. Known in the halls of French power as the chasse gardée, the private hunting ground. The rules of the game were simple, and brutally effective. Rule 1. Control the resources. Uranium from Niger to power 1/3 of France's lights. Gold from Burkina Faso and Mali to fortify the French treasury. Oil from Gabon and Congo. Rule 2. Control the governments. Through covert operations and financial pressure, Paris ensured friendly, often corrupt leaders were in power. Rule 3. Control the money. The CFA franc, a currency printed in France, backed by the French treasury, forcing 14 African nations to keep 50% of their foreign reserves in Paris. It was economic slavery disguised as stability. And Rule 4, control the security. French military bases dotted the continent, not just to fight terrorism, but to ensure that any leader who thought about breaking the rules, would quickly change their mind. The relationship was simple: command, and it shall be done. For decades, it worked. But empires get complacent. They forget that history always sends a bill. And after centuries of exploitation, the bill has finally arrived. And it is payable in full. The Great African Refusal, the Sahel ignites the fire. This wasn't a single event. It wasn't one revolution. It was a seismic wave of defiance. Starting in the heart of the Sahel, a region France thought it controlled most tightly. The alliance of the defiant. It began with coups. But not the coups of the past, orchestrated by foreign powers. These were popular uprisings, backed by citizens exhausted by corruption and foreign influence. In Mali, then Burkina Faso, then Niger, young military officers overthrew their French-backed governments. And their first act? Kicking out the French troops. But they didn't stop there. They did the unthinkable. They shredded the mining contracts. They took back their resources. And in a move that sent shockwaves from Paris to Wall Street, they formed the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. A mutual defense pact. A message to the world: attack one, and you attack us all. The financial death blow. The most terrifying prospect for Paris? The death of the CFA franc. The AES, along with other West African nations, is now actively planning a sovereign, gold-backed currency. Imagine that. African nations, using their own gold, to back their own money, for their own people. For France, this isn't a policy change. It's a financial death blow. The geopolitical pivot. And with France gone, who did they turn to? Russia, for military support with no democracy lectures. China, for infrastructure deals, with no political conditionalities. Turkey, for cutting-edge drones. They weren't replacing one master with another. They were playing the field. For the first time in modern history, Africa is negotiating from a position of strength. Why they are begging, the four horsemen of Europe's. So why is Europe suddenly so desperate? Why the charm offensive? Let's be clear, this isn't about altruism or guilt. It's about sheer, unadulterated panic. Europe is facing an existential crisis it never saw coming. Horseman 1, the resource reckoning. Without preferential access to African resources, the European economic model faces collapse. No Nigerian uranium means French nuclear plants, which provide 70% of its power, grind to a halt. No Burkinabe gold weakens the euro. No Congolese cobalt means no electric car revolution. Their entire post-war wealth was built on cheap African resources. That era is over. Horseman 2, the migration monster. A destabilized, impoverished Africa is a migration crisis of unimaginable scale, right on Europe's southern doorstep. Europe needs a stable Africa. But after decades of exploitation, they have precisely zero leverage to create that stability. They created the monster, and now they can't control it. Horseman 3, the geopolitical nightmare. Watching a continent of 1.4 billion people, the world's next great economic frontier, pivot towards Russia and China is a strategic disaster for Western hegemony. Every African nation that joins BRICS is another nail in the coffin of the American-led unipolar world. Europe is becoming irrelevant in its own backyard. Horseman 4, the economic implosion. French multinationals that built their empires on African profits are now staring into the abyss. Their shareholders are in open revolt. The Africa dividend that funded the French welfare state for generations is evaporating. The economic implosion has already begun. So, what is Europe's strategy? It's a pathetic mix of charm, offensive and veiled threats. And it's failing spectacularly. Tactic 1, the We're Sorry Tour. Suddenly, French presidents are giving speeches acknowledging past mistakes. EU diplomats are using phrases like partnership of equals. African leaders are nodding politely, and then signing another billion-dollar deal with Beijing. The empty words are seen for what they are, a last, desperate gamble. Tactic 2, the we have what you need offer. Promises of investment, vaccines, and aid are now met with a simple, devastating response. We can get that from China. Faster, cheaper, and with no strings attached. The monopoly is broken. The competition has arrived. The threaten and plead tactic. When they threatened sanctions against Mali and Niger, it backfired catastrophically. It didn't weaken the juntas. It strengthened them. It gave them a nationalist cause, a common enemy. It pushed them directly into the arms of Moscow. The threats are now empty, and everyone in the room knows it. The ultimate humiliation, being ignored.